She had it all: a primetime spotlight, a household name, a face America adored. At just 16, she was the it girl of network television, her smile beaming into millions of living rooms every Thursday night. But years later, she wasn't in front of the camera. She wasn't walking red carpets. She wasn't even on magazine covers where they celebrate "Where Are They Now" nostalgia. Instead, she was writing essays on aging, confronting a youth-obsessed culture, posting makeup-free photos, and calling out the industry that once crowned her for trying to erase her. While other former teen stars chased roles and fillers, she disappeared, and then reemerged with something far more dangerous than a comeback: a voice that refused to apologize for growing older. This is not a story of a fall from grace. This is a story of a woman who stopped playing the game and paid the price for walking away. This is the untold story of Justine Bateman. Before the world questioned her choices, Justine Bateman was America's sweetheart. Born on February 19, 1966 in Rye, New York, she was never supposed to be just someone's sister, though being the older sibling of Back to the Future star Jason Bateman did add to her early fame. Justine carved her own name into the walls of pop culture by becoming a television sensation at just 16 years old. It was 1982 when Family Ties first aired on NBC. A sitcom designed to showcase the cultural tensions between 1960s liberal parents and their conservative kids, the show was good. But it was the cast that made it unforgettable. Michael J. Fox rocketed to stardom as the young Republican Alex P. Keaton, but standing right beside him was his wisecracking, effortlessly cool older sister, Mallory Keaton, played by Justine Bateman. Mallory wasn't just another teenage girl on TV. She was stylish, witty, and represented a kind of rebellious glamour that felt relatable to millions. With her feathered brunette hair, expressive eyes, and easy laugh, Justine brought a warmth and charisma to the role that made her stand out. She became the unofficial face of teen fashion, featured in 17, Teen Beat, and Tiger Beat. Overnight, she went from high school student to television royalty. By the time she was 18, Justine had been nominated for an Emmy. By 20, she had graced red carpets, starred in made-for-TV movies, and was dubbed by tabloids as America's most watchable young actress. She had what everyone else wanted: fame, fan mail, and a future that looked unstoppable. But fame is a peculiar force. While the world sees glamour and ease, the young women at the center of it often see something else entirely: pressure, commodification, and a creeping fear that it could all disappear the moment they lose their youthful glow. Justine kept smiling. She played the part. She let the media define her as the funny one, the sister, the girl next door who made it. For the outside world, Justine Bateman was living the dream. She was part of the Hollywood golden youth of the 1980s, a decade obsessed with image, sparkle, and perpetual adolescence. But behind that perfect frame, time was ticking, and so was her tolerance for it all. The public never suspected that while Mallory Keaton was laughing on screen, the actress portraying her was already starting to question everything off-screen: her place, her power, and whether she even belonged in this industry once the applause faded. That was the version of Justine Bateman the world thought they knew: the radiant teen queen, the confident comedic actress, the girl who had it all by 21. They didn't see the woman she would become, or the war she would soon wage, not on Hollywood, but on its expectations. The cameras stopped rolling after each take. The laughter faded after the punchlines. But for Justine Bateman, the silence that followed was the most dangerous part of fame. At 16, she was already being told how to stand, what to wear, how to smile, and more importantly, how to stay small. Hollywood, ever obsessed with image, whispered rules that weren't in any contract. Don't gain weight, don't age, don't speak too loudly, and never ever show that you're struggling. She listened. Like so many girls who rose too fast, she internalized those whispers until they became law. Behind her confident persona, Justine was withering under the weight of expectation. She began battling an eating disorder, one that quietly shaped her teenage years even as the public celebrated her charm and beauty. Few knew she was skipping meals before photo shoots. Few knew how obsessed she'd become with staying thin enough to keep playing the part America loved. Her personal diary, never released but often hinted at in later interviews, was filled with a running commentary of self-judgment, fear, and shame. There were nights she cried alone in her trailer, days she stared into the mirror, measuring her worth in inches and pounds. And then came the depression, not loud or cinematic, but a slow erosion of spirit. It crept in during the height of her fame, masked by the noise of studio applause and fan letters. It wasn't sadness, she would later say. It was numbness. I stopped recognizing myself. Unlike other teen stars who turned to drugs or public meltdowns, Justine imploded inward. She didn't spiral in the tabloids. She simply began to disappear, not from the screen, but from herself. With every new season of Family Ties, the pressure grew heavier. She began to dread the very work that had once made her feel alive. And there was no space to talk about it. In the 1980s, mental health wasn't a conversation, especially not for a young woman on a hit show. Admitting weakness could mean the end of a career, so she didn't. She kept going. She played the part, on and off camera. When Family Ties ended in 1989, Justine was only 23, but she felt decades older. Years of self-surveillance, of silence, of being everything for everyone, had worn her down to a husk. She was offered more roles, some she took, others she refused, but the spark was gone. Hollywood didn't notice. It rarely does when its golden girls dim themselves quietly. In private, she began pulling away. From roles. From expectations. From the idea that she had to be Mallory Keaton forever. But letting go of a public identity comes at a price. Without the character, who was Justine Bateman? Without the applause, who was listening? It would take her years, decades even, to fully untangle that question. But long before she found answers, she had to endure a long, painful stretch of invisibility, where she wasn't young enough for Hollywood, but not ruined enough to be a cautionary tale. She was something far more terrifying to the industry. A woman in transition, a woman waking up, a woman no longer playing along, and for that, she was quietly erased. When Justine Bateman walked away from the spotlight, the world assumed she had vanished. Hollywood has a brutal habit. If a woman stops performing, it stops remembering. So while agents moved on and headlines shifted focus to younger faces, Justine was beginning something far more radical than a career shift, a personal revolution. In the early 2000s, she went to college, not as a celebrity guest speaker or honorary alumna, but as a student. She enrolled at UCLA to study computer science, sitting in classrooms next to teenagers who had no idea she was once a household name. For the first time in decades, she was learning something for herself, not performing for an audience. It was a deliberate act of self-erasure, not to disappear, but to rebuild. She was carving out a version of herself that had nothing to do with fame, applause, or beauty. Justine Bateman was no longer the punchline-slinging teen star. She was a coder, a writer, a mother. A woman outgrowing the narrow shape the industry had once forced her into. But reinvention came at a price. As she began re-emerging into public life, this time as an artist behind the scenes, she was met with confusion. Where had she been? Why did she look different? Why wasn't she chasing roles or Botox or the veneer of eternal youth? She had aged, naturally and unapologetically. It was an act so rare in Hollywood it felt like rebellion. In 2021, she published Face 1 Square Foot of Skin, a raw and unflinching book of essays about women, aging, and the societal obsession with youth. It wasn't a memoir. It was a manifesto, a declaration of war against an industry and a culture that views a woman's face as her only currency. In interviews, she didn't soften her stance. She didn't cater to mainstream narratives. She rejected plastic surgery, not as a moral stance, but as a personal truth. "My face represents who I am," she said. "It shows my journey. Why should I erase that?" Suddenly, Justine Bateman was no longer just a former teen star. She was a thought leader, speaking uncomfortable truths in a world that thrives on denial. She gave TED Talks, wrote op-eds, and even directed films like Violet, a psychological drama exploring the internal voices that sabotage us. It was a deeply personal project, autobiographical in spirit if not in fact. She wasn't just reinventing herself. She was deconstructing the myth of celebrity. Where others sought revival through nostalgia, she rejected the premise entirely. She didn't want to be remembered as Mallory Keaton. She wanted to be understood as Justine Bateman, the woman who saw behind the curtain and lived to tell the truth. But telling the truth in Hollywood is dangerous. She faced mockery online. Anonymous comments called her washed up, ugly, bitter. They couldn't grasp why a woman would choose to age on camera, or why she would speak so openly about her pain. To them, she was no longer relevant. To herself, she had never been more alive. Her reinvention wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with studio deals or magazine covers. But it was authentic. And in Hollywood, authenticity is the rarest commodity of all. Justine Bateman had refused to be fossilized in her youth. She had let time sculpt her into something new, an artist without illusions, a woman without apology. And for the first time, she was writing her own role. At the height of her fame, Justine Bateman was everywhere. Television Guide called her TV's most captivating teen. Fashion brands courted her. Talk shows booked her months in advance. She was nominated for a Golden Globe. Her face, radiant, youthful, camera-ready, was not just celebrated, it was consumed. She was invited to red carpets not for her words, but for her image. Her presence was enough. She represented a version of American femininity that was digestible, photogenic, and most of all, non-threatening. That was her peak. But peaks are cruel in Hollywood. They offer no plateau, only a rapid descent the moment your appearance shifts or your silence breaks. As the 1990s arrived, Justine's fame dimmed, not through scandal, but through subtraction. She didn't collapse. She didn't overdose or get arrested. She simply chose not to play the game anymore. And for Hollywood, that was worse than failure. It was defiance. Directors stopped calling. Her name stopped appearing in casting rooms. At events, she felt invisible, or worse, pitied. She wasn't an icon. She was a former everything. And then came the price. Irrelevance. But irrelevance, in Bateman's case, was not the absence of worth. It was the cost of self-preservation. Behind closed doors, she was rebuilding her sense of identity, no longer tethered to applause. Yet even as she quietly rewrote her life, the world reminded her, "We liked you better when you were 19. She was offered roles, but they weren't roles. They were caricatures. Tired stereotypes of the once hot mom or the bitter ex-wife. She refused. She wanted more. But wanting more in Hollywood, especially as a woman over 30, is seen as arrogance. And then came the whispers. She let herself go. She's difficult. She's angry. But she wasn't angry. She was awake. Still, awakening doesn't shield you from the consequences. For years, Bateman lived on the fringe of the industry. Not scandalized, not disgraced, just ignored. A ghost of her former self in the eyes of an industry that worships youth and rewards submission. But inside, she was changing. And that change was not painless. There were nights of doubt, bills unpaid, friends who drifted, the eerie silence of phones that used to ring with opportunity. There was depression, heavy, shapeless, and unrelenting. There were panic attacks that arrived like uninvited guests, and there were moments when she asked herself, "Did I make a mistake by walking away?" But she kept going. She wrote, she directed, she raised children. She embraced her aging face, not defiantly, but intimately. It became a journal in skin, recording a life lived beyond the spotlight. The lines, the creases, they weren't flaws, they were truth. And truth, she learned, is more powerful than youth. She didn't reclaim her peak. She redefined it. Her peak was not the sitcom stardom. It was not the magazine covers or award nominations. It was the moment she stood in front of a mirror, looked at her face, and decided it didn't need fixing. That was her revolution. And the price? It was steep. She lost status. She lost the comfort of celebrity. She lost the easy acceptance that comes with fitting the mold. But she gained something else. Herself. Justine Bateman didn't fade. She refused to disappear. While Hollywood moved on to younger faces and airbrushed illusions, she stayed. Still, visible, unfiltered. She didn't chase a second act that mirrored her first. She created one with entirely different rules. Her legacy isn't measured in box office numbers or syndication royalties. It's etched in truth-telling. In the essays that dared to say what other actresses whispered behind closed doors. In the photos she shared without filters. In the interviews where she dismantled ageism with quiet fury. She has become a symbol, not of rebellion, but of resistance. Not because she sought it, but because she earned it. Every wrinkle on her face is a record of survival. Every sentence she pens is a refusal to conform. And every woman who scrolls past her name and feels a little less ashamed of aging, that's her echo. In the end, Justine Bateman didn't let Hollywood rewrite her into a cautionary tale. She rewrote herself into a counter-narrative. No longer the girl who laughed on Thursday nights, no longer the industry's darling. Now she is something far rarer. A woman who aged in public and didn't apologize. She didn't vanish. She became a reminder that being forgotten by Hollywood is not the same as being erased by history.